we came to the conclusion that one of the things we want to do at the scientific conference is we want to help people develop as scientists, and also, even if you're not a scientist, develop a better understanding of what scientists are doing, how to communicate with scientists, how to read scientific material and such. So this becomes, we've done this before, but we're recording this one. So this one's the one that counts, I guess. So cheer and yell real loud, make it sound like, you know, this is just great stuff. Thank you. Yes, thank you, yes. So in some ways, writing abstracts is, I think, most scientists' worst nightmare. They simply don't want to do it. It's usually the last thing they write. And part of that is simply because they say, this is tough to do. So we want to try to give you some tips and helps of how to write abstracts. Now, part of writing abstract is going to include writing a title, particularly when you're writing an abstract like for our conference, submitting it to it, you need to put a title to it. And sometimes we get abstracts with no titles. And it's like, oh, that's very interesting, but we need a title. All right, so the purpose of the title is to convey a quick insight into the content of the paper or the presentation. You have to recognize that many times people read nothing but the title. And it's really your quick decision. You know, it's that what do they call it in real estate, where you're just standing out there looking at the house. It's the curbside, curb appeal. There we go. Your title is your curb appeal. If the title sounds horrendous, I can almost promise you they're not going to read any further. Okay, so you want to make sure the title gives an insight into the paper, but you want to make sure the title also is something that even is interesting to people. All right, there's 3 basic types of titles. One is a declarative. That's where you state your main findings and conclusions. So in other words, your title is actually kind of a mini abstract. Okay, for example, protein XYZ causes an increased ABC transporter activity. So it's declared right there, this is what you found, this is what's happening. For research papers, this is going to be the most common style of title. Okay, another style is the descriptive. This is where you describe the subject, but you don't quite reveal the main conclusion. Example, the effects of protein XYZ on ABC transport activity. Well, what are the effects? Well, you've got to read the paper, you got to come to the presentation to find that out. So it's like you're kind of dangling a little bit there for them supposedly to take the bait to want to learn more. Okay? This is often the most common scientific title, but it's not necessarily the preferable. As one instructor told me one time, this is not an O. Henry novel. You're not dangling out the end for that surprise ending. Science should always be very upfront and very clear from the very beginning. It's not a mystery. At least the writing is not a mystery. Sometimes you look at the writing and you say, this is a mystery. All right, interrogative. That's where you introduce the subject as a question. For example, does protein XYZ alter ABC transporter activity? Now this is going to be very common for literature reviews. Because literature review, you are saying, I'm going to address this question of what is happening. The length of the title. Well, the optimum length. All right, here is an example from the Nucleic Acid Research Journal. Okay, the title itself, the nucleotide sequence of 3.2 kilobyte segment of mitochondrial macrocircular DNA, on and on and on. That's the title. It's not the abstract. Yes. That title is 48 words long. I would suggest that a lot of people won't even finish reading the title and say, I'm done. So my postdoc advisor would write titles like this, usually not quite this bad. And I would tease her, I'd say, you know, you don't need an abstract. The title and the abstract serve the same purpose. The problem you face with those kind of titles is it is statistically demonstratable that there is a correlation between the citation rate of the paper and the length of the title. And if you have you can see from this, if you have a title with more than 100 or so letters, the citation level goes down dramatically. So a title such as this, on average, your citation level is going to plummet because people just simply aren't going to read the paper. And they often don't cite what they don't read. So you have to bear in mind that obviously shorter is better. Now, you have to recognize, though, you can also be too short. You want as few as possible words to describe the paper, to describe the content, to describe what you're going to be presenting, but you can also give such a short title it doesn't tell you anything. You know, bacterial treatments. Okay, what about them? They have no idea the direction this paper's going. So once again, just like with the super long title, I may say a title like that and say, well, I don't understand where it's going, and so you may not even read further. So with either the too short or the too long, you will fail to grab the reader's attention. And they either then don't read the abstract, don't read the rest of the paper, or they don't come to your talk. Statistically speaking, about 12 words is optimum. Approximately 12 words is the best. It's just long enough to be able to convey the content without being so long that people are kind of getting tired of reading it. Including, especially when you recognize the titles should, for the most part, be a single sentence. How many people want to read a 48-word single sentence? All right, some common grammatical mistakes. For example, this is an actual title that I pulled off, Mechanism of Suppression of Pneumonia in Mice Induced by Newcastle Virus. Okay, what's the problem with this title? Yeah, you're not inducing the mice, but those are very common type mistakes, and I think we've all made them. I'm sure I've made them too. Okay, subtitles are permissible, but you need to keep them short. Many times they say, well, we got a short title, but then the subtitle goes on and on and on. But recognize it's still really part of the title. In fact, I recommend try rewriting the title without the subtitle. And if the title is just fine, then drop the subtitle. It doesn't serve any additional purpose. Okay? Avoid saying action of or effect of. And that's tough to do because that's very common in the literature. A paper will say effect of XYZ, action of XYZ. Well, really it's understood that you're looking at the effect or the action. So those become kind of irrelevant terminologies that just add to the verbiage of the title. Okay? Acronyms and other abbreviations. Unless you spell them out, avoid using them if possible. You have to bear in mind, again, see, people may only read the title, and if they don't understand the acronym or the abbreviation you're using, they don't know what the title is referring to. Okay? Avoid as much as possible using jargon. Now, granted, in scientific circles, there is a certain level of jargon that's just part of the language. But try to keep it to a minimum. Because once again, your reader may not be totally versed on your specific jargon, especially at a conference like this, where you got people in all walks, even have physicists. And they look at a biology paper, and if there's got too much jargon in the title, they may say, well, I have no idea what it's talking about. Of course, they may say they have no idea what it's talking about anyway, but it makes it even less likely if you've got a lot of jargon in your title. Okay? Now, the abstract itself. Okay? What is an abstract? Okay? It's not that. Okay? That's not what we're talking about. Although I think Bob can attest that we have over the years gotten abstracts that were probably about that understandable. Yes. All right. An abstract is a summary of the information being presented. It's just that simple. A summary of what you're going to talk about, a summary of what your paper is going to be about. There are 4 basic purposes of an abstract. You want to give scope and objective of the study. You want to describe the methodologies that you've used. You want to provide a summary, and you want to provide some kind of conclusion. So in other words, when I read the abstract, I should have an idea of why this study has occurred. I should have an idea of what you did. Now, obviously, you're not going into great detail, but I should be able to say, oh, they used method X versus method Y. That already tells me the direction that they're going as far as methodology. A summary as in, I should be able to ascertain from the abstract what the results were. Now, not in detail, obviously, but if the study is defined, if proteins XYZ affect transporter ABC, I should know from the abstract whether it does or not. Okay, again, this is not a mystery novel where you're dangling the end until, the whodunit until the final chapter or till the final paragraph. And then I need a main conclusion. Okay, this is the result you got. What's that mean? Why should I care? Okay, abstracts, remember, are often published alone. Your proceedings, or your program, for example, all we put in there was abstracts. Based on the abstract, you determined if you wanted to go see the talk or not, listen to the talk or not. So it needs to be standalone. You're not expecting people to then, from the abstract, go into the literature and start digging up all the other stuff you've written. They might, but you can't expect them to do that. Even abstracts in public scientific publications often are published separately. That's what people see first. And the abstract then is what they read. Many journals offer abstracts as free viewing, but if you want to see the paper, you got to pay. So the journal would like the abstract to entice them enough that they're willing to pay for the paper. Okay? The abstract will be used as a preview to determine if I'm interested in wanting to read the rest of this paper, wanting to go to that presentation. The abstract, as I mentioned, is often the most challenging of all the scientific writing. Many scientists still do not write abstracts very well. Many scientists say, okay, I've got everything else written, now I got to write the abstract, because it's just difficult to accomplish those 4 objectives I've talked about in the form of an abstract. That is a challenging piece of writing. So hopefully we can help a little bit. Okay, abstract should contain a brief background and significance. In other words, why'd you do the work? What's the big deal? Who cares? An overview, as I said, of your methods. Did you use method X? Did you use method Y? Use method Z? A combination of those? Okay, it should include your results, and it should include kind of a summary, summarizing the value of the results, and as I said, the relevance. What's this all mean? Okay, some do's. You need to succinctly represent the information in the paper or the presentation. And I emphasize the word succinctly, and there becomes the challenge. Need to get it in as short a form as possible. It's easy to write 1,000 pages if you just ramble on and on and on. Okay, succinctness. Abraham Lincoln was what asked how long it took him to write a speech, and he said, "Well, if it's a 2-hour speech, it doesn't take me any time at all. But if it's a 5-minute speech, I spend weeks on it." See, because the more succinct it is, the more you've got to tune and edit and refine, and it's the same with abstracts. Okay, you need to be specific, but with detail. Part of the challenge. Typically, you're also going to have a word limit, or at least an approximate word limit. So you got to work within that as well. Okay, abstracts should be written in the past tense, especially research abstracts. If it's a review abstract, that's a little different. You can sometimes write that in the present tense. But the research has already been done, so it's written in the past tense. And then it should be unbiased. And what I'm meaning by that is the abstract should at least contain some reference to all of your results, not just those results you liked. And in the paper, buried somewhere is the results you didn't like. Okay, if there's part of the results you didn't like, then that should also be mentioned in the abstract. So there's not something hidden in there. We're trying to just put on a positive face when the results themselves or when the study itself doesn't necessarily provide that. Okay, some don'ts. Don't make it too superficial. Too vague, it lacks useful information. I can't tell anything from the abstract because it doesn't tell me anything. This is really important work. We used a variety of methods. We found adversary results, and the impact and significance of the work will be explained. And I hate to say it, but I've almost seen abstracts like this before. It just simply doesn't tell you anything. I have to tell a personal story on myself. When I was finishing my PhD work, I was submitting an abstract. I was submitting an abstract for a conference, and the work wasn't done yet. And so the professor I was working with, he just said, well, just simply say that the work and significance will be explained. And I thought, that doesn't seem right, but that's what we did. Because we didn't have it done yet. But obviously that is not a very informative abstract, and that's not how you would write a quality abstract. Okay, some other don'ts. Can apparent superluminal neutrino speeds be explained as a quantum weak measurement? The abstract is
well, it gets to the point.
yeah. And this was heralded as a great abstract. The problem is, as funny as it is, obviously that doesn't address what we need in an abstract. It doesn't tell us. They say probably not, but well, what method did you use to study the neutrino speeds? You may find out, then to read the abstract, say, oh, I don't like that method, or oh, I think that's been disproven. See, so it doesn't give you enough information to really be able to make the determinations that we need to be able to make with abstracts. As clever as it is, it really doesn't serve as a professional scientific abstract. Okay, abstracts should not be more than one paragraph unless the publication of the conference allows such, and sometimes they do. But the idea is a single abstract. That also helps keep it as a single line of thought, not breaking it all up. Plus, it also helps work to keep it mentally where you make it shorter. Because when you can do paragraphs, it's amazing how it just kind of keeps going and going and going and going and going. Okay, inappropriately long. Most publications will have some kind of word limit on abstracts for the very purpose that otherwise they just keep going and going and going. We impose a 250 word limit. Now, granted, if it's 252 words, we're not going to reject it. But we impose a 250 word limit for this conference because that's what nicely fits on the program page. And we feel like that's an appropriate length that people will read. Once again, like with the title, you get the abstract too long, people just simply won't read it. They'll go partway through and they'll quit. So we feel like 250 words is a very appropriate length. It's also very common with a lot of publications and other conferences as well. Okay, here is an abstract I pulled online. And you notice, you look at that and you say, that really kind of almost looks like a short paper. It's a research note, which is exactly what it is, except that's the abstract of the paper. And I gave up counting the words. It's over 400. That's a huge abstract. Again, people won't read all of that unless they're really into this type of human tumors. Okay, other don'ts, don't use abbreviations and acronyms unless they're standard. DNA, everybody understands. But other abbreviations that you haven't yet defined, avoid them in the abstract. So that when somebody reads it and they're saying, I don't know what that's referring to. You know, if I was writing a paper about second harmonic generation, and I just said SHG imaging, somebody go, what is that? I have no idea what that is. Because remember, the abstract often will stand alone. Okay, other don'ts. Don't use italics. Why do people italicize? Typically, yeah, there's grammatical rules and there's scientific rules for italicizing, but typically the italics is used as a way of drawing emphasis, and that's not appropriate in technical scientific writing, because you're not trying to suggest that this is more important than this. That's not how scientific writing works. So avoid italics, bold, underlining, different fonts, quotation marks, etc., unless required by rules of grammar, or I should also add in there the rules of scientific nomenclature. Okay, never have information in the abstract that's not in the talk or the paper. Now, we say that's never, and yet we still all tend to do it, and me too. Sometimes you get something, especially in a talk, you get something, oh, I just found this out last week, and the abstract's already been published. So you just make the exception, even though it's a never. But the reason it's a never is because what happens is that if I have material that's in the paper that's not in the abstract, then the person reading the abstract didn't get everything that's actually now in the paper, and vice versa. Don't put stuff in the abstract that's not in the paper, that's not in the talk. Oh, the abstract had all this, but I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm going to talk about this instead. The abstract was talking about this star, but I decided I didn't like that star. I want to talk about this star. See, so don't do that. That's not how you professionally write abstracts. Okay, don't include literature references. Remember, typically the abstract will have to stand alone at some point in time. A literature reference where you would cite, Bob Hill et al. In his 1982 paper, and we say, okay, I have no idea what that is. What paper is that? It is sufficient in writing abstract to simply just say previous work is shown. You're going to give the paper later on, either in the presentation or in your article publication. You're going to give the citation. So you don't need to worry about giving it in the abstract. Just say previous work. You're establishing this is work that's been done that I'm building off of. Okay, don't offer vague references to various results will be reported. We're going to talk about this later on. Don't offer that. And don't include figures, illustrations, or tables. This is one of my big pet peeves. Okay, they do not belong in the abstract. That's part of your results section of your paper. That's part of the slides you're going to be giving in a presentation. That's not part of the abstract. And don't refer to figures, tables. In this figure in the paper later on, it will show that. Okay, that doesn't mean anything to the person reading the abstract that doesn't have your paper. You just simply describe what the results are. Don't refer to figures or tables. If we go back to this abstract again, you'll notice that they have 1, 2, 3, 4. That's referring to references. When this is a standalone abstract, the references won't go with it. So what's 1, 2, 3, and 4? We don't know. It's a reference somewhere, right? But it doesn't go, the reference section of the paper doesn't go with the abstract when the abstract is standalone. Also notice they refer to figure 1 and figure 2. Once again, see, the figures don't go with the abstract when it's standalone. So the person reading this has no idea what figure 1 and 2 look like. And it's not necessary. If it's an abstract for an article, then the idea is they'll see the references, they'll see the figures later on. So you don't need to cite them yet. Okay, if the presentation, then they got to come to your presentation to see what references are, to see what the figures and tables are. All right, so let's go through an example of an abstract. Okay, first off, the title. Remember, title length and title content, very important. Transformation of graduate students to full professors involves a series of directed mutations. Okay, so this is the declarative style of title. All right, how many words is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 words. So it's right there in that appropriate range. Okay, of course, then you got the authors, Mojo and Know-It-All, All-Knowing, and No Clue. Notice No Clue is always going to be the last author because that's the senior author is the end. So No Clue, yeah. And they usually had No Clue. All right. Now, in this abstract, the first 2 sentences constitute the introduction. What are we looking at? Why are we looking at it? All right. So, academic success is hypothesized to require specific phenotypes. So we're establishing the question we're looking at. That's our hypothesis. All right. The origin of these phenotypes, though, is uncertain. Okay, so that's the question. That's our challenge. This is why this work needs to be done, or it needed to be done. Okay, now then, the body of this particular abstract is the methodology. Sometimes the methodology will be shorter, sometimes longer, depending upon what you did. All right, so methodology in this abstract is using human clones. We identified molecular events involved in the transformation of graduate students to professors. All right, a pool of graduate student clones was subjected to several rounds of mutagenesis, followed by selection on minimal money media in the absence of dental insurance. All right, students surviving this selection were further screened for their ability to work long hours with vending machine snacks as their sole carbon source. Okay, mutants from this selection were identified as postdocs. And boy, can I attest to that. Transition of postdocs to assistant professors was achieved by additional mutagenesis and screening for the ability to turn esoteric information into 50-minute lectures. Okay, resulting assistant professors displaying specific stress proteins, otherwise known as stressed out mutants, were categorized as associate professors. These mutants were then subjected to a fusion with the incoherent protein and subsequently passed over a friends family column to identify those fully incapable of functional interaction. This last collection of mutants was designated as full professors. See, so there is our methodology. This is how we got through all the screening process of all of our mutants to arrive at what it takes to go from a student to a full professor. Okay, so now then we move on to the results. What did we find? Okay, this group of mutants shared many unique phenotypes. What group of mutants? The full professors. These included the propensity to talk incessantly about their research, the inability to accurately judge time required to complete a project, boy, if that's not ever true, and the belief that all their ideas constitute great science. The linkage of these traits suggests coordinated regulation. Preliminary work has identified a punitive global regulator called POP, known as publish or perish. And then we finish up the abstract, remember, with the summary conclusions, kind of bringing the relevance back into play so the people know why it is that this research was valuable. Okay, current studies are seeking to determine if overexpression of POP will increase transition rate from grad student to full professor or conversely result in more McDonald's managers. So, following these instructions, then, we will assume that next year your abstracts will be perfect-ish. Thank you.
That's it.